Mr. Speaker, thank you for granting me permission to make this statement to the House today. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister set out the next stage of the government's health response to coronavirus. Today, I want to explain the next phase of our planned economic response. The House will be reassured to know I've been developing plans to protect jobs and the economy over the winter period. Plans that seek to strike the finely judged balance between managing the virus and protecting the jobs and livelihoods of millions. Mr. Speaker, I know people are anxious and afraid and exhausted at the prospect of further restrictions on our economic and social freedoms. I share those feelings, but there are reasons to be cautiously optimistic. We are in a fundamentally different position than we were in March, and we now know much more about this virus. Public awareness of the risks and how to mitigate them is far greater. And we have met our promise to give the NHS whatever it needs, with significant new funding for NHS capacity, for PPE, and I can inform the House today we have now provided over £12 billion for test and trace. In economic terms, while our output remains well below where it was in February, we have seen 3 consecutive months of growth, and millions of people have moved off the furlough and back to work. But the resurgence of the virus and the measures we need to take in response pose a threat to this fragile economic recovery. So our task now is to move to the next stage of our economic plan, nurturing the recovery by protecting jobs through the difficult winter months. Mr. Speaker, the underlying rationale for the next phase of economic support must be different to what came before. The primary goal of our economic policy remains unchanged: to support people's jobs. But the way we achieve that must evolve. Back in March, we hoped we were facing a temporary period of disruption. In response, we provided one of the most generous and comprehensive economic plans anywhere in the world, with £190 billion of support for people, businesses and public services as we protected our economic capacity. It is now clear, as the Prime Minister and our scientific advisers have said, for at least the next 6 months, the virus and restrictions are going to be a fact of our lives. Our economy is now likely to undergo a more permanent adjustment. The sources of our economic growth and the kinds of jobs we create will adapt and evolve to the new normal. And our plan needs to adapt and evolve in response. Above all, we need to face up to the trade-offs and hard choices coronavirus presents. And, Mr. Speaker, there has been no harder choice than the decision to end the furlough scheme. The furlough was the right policy at the time we introduced it. It provided immediate short-term protection for millions of jobs through a period of acute crisis. But as the economy reopens, it is fundamentally wrong to hold people in jobs that only exist inside the furlough. We need to create new opportunities and allow the economy to move forward. And that means supporting people to be in viable jobs which provide genuine security. As I've said throughout this crisis, I cannot save every business. I cannot save every job. No Chancellor could. But what we can and must do is deal with the real problems businesses and employees are facing now. In March, the problem was that we ordered businesses to close. In response, we paid people to stay at home and not work. Today, the problem is different. Many businesses are operating safely and viably, but they now face uncertainty and reduced demand over the winter months. What those businesses need is support to bring people back to work and protect as many viable jobs as we can. To do that, I'm announcing today the new Jobs Support Scheme. The government will directly support the wages of people in work, giving businesses who face depressed demand the option of keeping employees in a job on shorter hours rather than making them redundant. The Job Support Scheme is built on 3 principles. First, it will support viable jobs. To make sure of that, employees must work at least a third of their normal hours and be paid for that work as normal by their employer. The government, together with employers, will then increase those people's wages, covering 2/3 of the pay they have lost by reducing their working hours. And the employee will keep their job. Second, we will target support at firms who need it the most. All small and medium-sized businesses are eligible, but larger businesses only when their turnover has fallen through the crisis. Third, it will be open to employers across the United Kingdom, even if they have not previously used the furlough scheme. The scheme will run for 6 months, starting in November. And employers retaining furloughed staff on shorter hours can claim both the Job Support Scheme and the Jobs Retention Bonus. Mr. Speaker, throughout this crisis, we have sought parity between employees and the self-employed, providing more than £13 billion of support to over 2.6 million self-employed small businesses. So I am extending the existing self-employed grant on similar terms and conditions as the new Jobs Support Scheme. Mr. Speaker, these are radical interventions in the UK labour market, policies we have never tried in this country before. Together with the Jobs Retention Bonus, the Kickstart scheme for young people, tens of billions of pounds of job creation schemes, new investment in training and apprenticeships, we are protecting millions of jobs and businesses. Mr. Speaker, if we want to protect jobs this winter, the second major challenge is helping businesses with cash flow. Over the last 6 months, we've supported business with tens of billions of pounds of tax deferrals and generous government-backed loans. Those policies have been a lifeline. But right now, businesses need every extra pound to protect jobs rather than repaying loans and tax deferrals. So I'm taking 4 further steps today to make that happen. First, bounce-back loans have given over 1 million small businesses a £38 billion boost to survive this pandemic. To give those businesses more time and greater flexibility to repay their loans, we are introducing Pay As You Grow. This means loans can now be extended from 6 to 10 years, nearly halving the average monthly repayment. Businesses who are struggling can now choose to make interest-only payments, and anyone in real trouble can apply to suspend repayments altogether for up to 6 months. No business taking up Pay As You Grow will see their credit rating affected as a result. Second, I am also changing the terms of our other loan schemes. More than 60,000 small and medium-sized businesses have now taken out coronavirus business interruption loans. To help them, I plan to extend the government guarantee on these loans for up to 10 years, making it easier for lenders to give more people more time to repay. I am also extending the deadline of all our loan schemes to the end of this year. And we are starting work on a new successor loan guarantee programme set to begin in January. Third, I want to give businesses more time and flexibility over their deferred tax bills. Nearly 500,000 businesses deferred more than £30 billion of VAT this year. On current plans, those payments fall due in March. Instead, I will allow businesses to spread that VAT bill over 11 smaller repayments with no interest to pay. and any of the millions of self-assessed income taxpayers who need extra help can also now extend their outstanding tax bill over 12 months from next January. The final step I'm taking today will support two of the most affected sectors: hospitality and tourism. On current plans, their VAT rates will increase from 5% back to the standard rate of 20% on January the 13th. So to support more than 150,000 businesses and help protect 2.4 million jobs through the winter, I'm announcing today that we are cancelling the planned increase and will keep the lower 5% VAT rate until March the 31st next year. Mr. Speaker, today's measures mark an important evolution in our approach. Our lives can no longer be put on hold. Since May, we have taken steps to liberate our economy and society. We did these things because life means more than simply existing. We find meaning and hope through our friends and family, through our work, through our community. People were not wrong for wanting that meaning, for striving towards normality, and nor was the government wrong to want this for them. I said in the summer that we must endure and live with the uncertainty of the moment. This means learning our new limits as we go. Because the truth is, the responsibility for defeating coronavirus cannot be held by government alone. It is a collective responsibility shared by all, because the cost is paid by all. We have so often spoken about this virus in terms of lives lost. But the price our country is paying is wider than that. The government has done much to mitigate the effects of these awful trade-offs between health, education, and employment. And as we think about the next few weeks and months, we need to bear all of those costs in mind. As such, it would be dishonest to say there is now some risk-free solution, or that we can mandate behaviour to such an extent we lose any sense of personal responsibility. What was true at the beginning of this crisis remains true now. It's on all of us, and we must learn to live with it and live without fear. I commend this statement to the House.
Just to say, I recognise the importance of this statement, and quite rightly, you need a little more time. And just to show that, I'll ensure that the other two, not only the Shadow Chancellor, but the spokesperson as well, will have some extra time as well. Shadow Chancellor Annalise Dodds. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Chancellor for his statement and for advance sight of this announcement. Mr. Speaker, I've called for the introduction of a system of targeted wage support 40 times. That call has been rebuffed by this government 20 times. It's a relief this government have U-turned now. But we must be open and honest. That delay in introducing this new scheme will have impacted on businesses' confidence. I know that from talking to them, and I'm sure members on the opposite benches know that from talking to businesses in their constituencies. The deadline for redundancy consultations by large firms before the end of the furlough scheme came and went last week without a word from this government. Now, if the package of measures announced today can help people keep their jobs and can help businesses through hard times, then Labour will, of course, support it. And there's much in this statement that we do support. As I've just said, we've repeatedly called for a system of targeted wage support, and we've repeatedly called for help for indebted, cash-strapped businesses over and over again. But we must ensure these measures are as effective as possible at keeping workers in employment, getting unemployed people back into work and keeping viable businesses in operation. Now, as with many previous announcements by this government, we must wait for the detail to be revealed, presumably following the press conference scheduled for later on today. But workers and businesses are hanging on the Chancellor's every word right now, and they need to know what's promised here. So can the Chancellor be clear? Will this scheme of wage supports actually keep more people in work? Because for that to happen, the scheme must make it more attractive for employers to retain more staff on reduced hours than to retain some full-time and make others redundant. So does his scheme actually incentivise short hours working? What conditions, if any, will be applied to ensure value for public money? Will the scheme require commitments for continuing employment, unlike the existing furlough scheme where there have been abuses? And will it require those participating to provide decent, sustainable work? Will the scheme incentivise training and retraining? The German scheme does, and Labour's called for a UK version to include incentives for training, but that's missing here. Indeed, while, as I said, we welcome many of the elements the Chancellor has announced today, the lack of action on training and skills is worrying. I was waiting and waiting for the Chancellor to talk about training. He mentioned the word once in passing. That's not enough. His government has already allocated funding for a national skills strategy, but it's not being delivered on the ground. So when will the Chancellor get serious about training so people can be ready for the jobs of the future? He mentioned the fact our economy is changing. Let's make sure that our population is ready for that change. Now, Labour has called repeatedly for continued targeted support for the self-employed, so I'm pleased that's referred to here. But will these measures avoid the gaps in coverage that have bedevilled existing schemes? And why is there no forward plan here for the needs of those who are extremely clinically vulnerable to this disease? Relatedly, will the Chancellor do more to demand his colleagues get a grip on the UK's public health crisis? Because our country is suffering from a double tragedy: the highest excess death rate in Europe and the deepest recession in the G7. Labour supports the government in its announcement of additional restrictions this week. The government's messaging has been confused enough already. The last thing we want to do is add to that confusion. But we are concerned that these restrictions have only been necessary because of continuing problems with test, trace and isolate. Now, the Chancellor referred to the money that has been put into test, trace and isolate. As I said earlier this week, enormous sums have been devoted to that task, but those sums are not delivering the system that we need. We are still not at the stage of many other countries. The Chancellor must work on this as well as his other colleagues in government. Now, finally, before the summer recess, Labour called for a back-to-work budget focused on jobs, jobs, jobs. We didn't get one. We expected a budget this autumn. It appears again we're not getting one, and that's despite the challenges this poses for devolved governments and despite the fact that governments actually referred to provisions in a future finance bill as necessary for its approach to Brexit. The Chancellor only announced he'd make a statement to Parliament today after I'd called for him to come here with an urgent question, and I'm very grateful to Mr. Speaker for granting that. Now, this government has lagged behind on test, trace and isolate. It's lagged behind on wage support. It's lagged behind on support for those having to self-isolate. It's lagging behind on green investment. And for these and for other reasons, it looks like our recovery will be lagging behind that of many other countries. So finally, when will the Chancellor provide the back-to-work budget this country needs? Thank you.
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member opposite for her comments. On the question of continued support for jobs, however, I would have hoped that she would have welcomed strongly today's measures, if for no other reason that she has previously asked for something similar. However, her position on this matter has been somewhat changeable, Mr. Speaker. At different points in the last few weeks and months, she has said that furlough shouldn't go on forever, and then changed her mind and said we should extend it. And then she changed her mind and said it should be replaced, And then only yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition said it should be extended again. That's not the kind of certainty that British businesses or British workers need. But to address the specific questions, Mr. Speaker, this scheme absolutely does incentivise shorter time working. The company will pay its workers for the time that they are in work, and the government and the employer jointly will subsidise the time of the worker is not working. The conditions will be set out in guidance, which will be published shortly, and then over the next few weeks, the further details will be worked through with businesses and unions, as we did with the furlough scheme. In terms of conditionality, I can reassure the Honourable Lady opposite, the new scheme does indeed have the conditionality that is appropriate for this stage of our response. Notably, this scheme will only be available for larger companies who are seeing an actual decline in their revenues as a result of coronavirus, ensuring that our support is targeted where it is most needed. Similarly, there will be restrictions on larger companies in terms of capital distributions to shareholders whilst they are in receipt of money for their workers on this scheme, and indeed they will not be able to make redundancy notices to those workers who are on this scheme throughout its duration. On training, I would just say to the Honourable Member opposite, we have increased training both for post-16 at the budget and indeed in the recent plan for jobs, providing increased access for school leavers to access level 2 qualifications across the board. And notably, one of the hallmarks of our skills system is our successful apprenticeship programme. And what we announced in July was a significant increase in the incentive payment to businesses for taking on a new apprentice. £2,000 cash incentive to businesses to take on an apprentice and provide that valuable in-work training that we know makes such a difference to young people's futures. So we are committed to providing especially our young people with the opportunities that they need to succeed in the future. The Honourable Lady opposite talked about jobs. Mr. Speaker, in July we outlined a £30 billion plan for jobs to support, create and protect jobs across every part of our United Kingdom. Chief among the initiatives was the Kickstart scheme, where right now employers, small, medium and large, are rushing to put in applications to take on a young Kickstarter to start later this autumn and provide them with the opportunities that they need at an incredibly difficult time. And I can assure this House and the country my number one economic priority is to protect people's jobs. And that's what this government will continue to do. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the opposition wanted the furlough extended, but they never said for how long. Then they wanted the furlough replaced, but they wouldn't say what with. Then they wanted the furlough targeted, but they wouldn't say to who. I do stand ready to work with the Honourable Member opposite if she knew exactly what she wanted. Today, the government stands with the British people and British business, with the CBI, with the British Chambers of Commerce, with the Trades Union Congress in bringing much-needed support to the economy. Yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition called for a Plan B for the economy. Mr. Speaker, the party opposite don't even have a Plan A.
We're now heading to the Chair of the Select Committee in the South West with Mel Stride. Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The devil, of course, will be in the detail, but from what I've heard of this statement, Mr. Speaker, can I broadly and warmly welcome it? I'm encouraged by the job support scheme, the fact that it's targeted, which is something that I and my committee have been calling for some time. I'm encouraged by the announcement on loans, the pay-as-you-grow scheme, particularly to help small and medium-sized enterprises, and I'm encouraged that the self-employed will have their scheme extended. But my right honourable friend will know that there was very considerable concern under the existing arrangements that many self-employed people fell through the gaps of the support provided. And could my right honourable friend say something about whether some of those gaps that have occurred in the past will be ameliorated or ironed out as a consequence of the new measures to come forward? And would he meet me in fairly short order to discuss the options that might be available.
Chancellor?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for his comments, and I'm sure he will see in much of what we've announced today some of the thinking in his latest report. So I thank him and his committee members for all the input that they have provided in helping us think about the next phase of our economic response. And he's right, this package focuses on employment and indeed in supporting businesses with their cash flow. With regard to the self-employed, I'm glad he welcomes the extension in the existing support grant. This is something that virtually no other country in the world has done, and it comes on top of the most generous support to our self-employed out of almost any country throughout their response to this crisis. And especially, of course, I'll be happy to meet with him, but I know he will also be pleased to learn that the measures today to defer income tax self-assessment will be of particular importance to our self-employed small businesses.
SNP spokesperson Alison Thewlett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we in these benches are glad that the Chancellor has accepted the need to extend support, but he is coming very late in the day to do this, and it is little comfort to those who have already lost their jobs due to the impending ending of the furlough scheme. Industry, trade unions, the Treasury Select Committee, people across the country and cross-party members in this House have been pleading with him for months now, and it feels like it's only this latest spike that has prompted his action here today. Coronavirus, Mr. Speaker, is not done with us yet. The furlough scheme has saved jobs, kept people paying their bills and their mortgages, and it has been incredibly important, and it is a shame that he is ending it at the end of next month. Hospitality, travel and tourism, aviation, exhibitions, culture and performing arts, and even travelling show people, and a host of others cannot go back to normal work because his government has placed restrictions on their businesses. Those jobs, those businesses are viable, and it's not for him to decide the viability of businesses. Ending this scheme puts 61,000 Scottish jobs at risk. His measures on the pay-as-you-grow scheme recognise that many businesses have deferred payments and have mounting debt. However, the problem for many businesses is not income deferred, it's income lost completely. So will he go further and convert those loans to grants and to equity to give companies a bit more certainty about their future? We welcome the hospitality and tourism VAT cut, but will he reassess this in March and perhaps consider keeping it in place permanently to help those businesses pick up, hopefully, through an improved business next summer? There is nothing here, Mr. Speaker, nothing whatsoever for those that have been excluded from existing support schemes. The freelancers, the Forgotten Limited, the PAYE, the new starters, the women in maternity, and all of those who have not one penny piece from this government for 6 months. He cannot say he doesn't know this is a problem, although he still refuses to meet with them. How dare he say that these 3 million people should be left high and dry with nothing? Will he place further conditions to prevent unscrupulous employers exploiting the new scheme, such as BA and others have done? And will he support my colleague from Paisley and Renfrewshire North's Fire and Rehire Bill, which would prevent that exploitation in future? Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor did not have the courtesy to lift the phone to the Cabinet Secretary for Finance in the Scottish Government, Kate Forbes, or her counterparts in Wales and Northern Ireland to let her know that he plans to scrap the autumn budget. They found out on Twitter, Mr. Speaker. And it's not the first time that this government has had a lack of respect for the devolved institutions, because this happened last year too. Does he appreciate the very difficult situation he has created by this, and that with no access to the fiscal levers and no clarity on the funding settlement, he has tied both of Kate Forbes' hands behind his back? What does he intend to do about that?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Speaker, to the honourable lady's questions, I think she is continuing to ask for an extension of the furlough scheme, but fundamentally, I do not believe that would be the right thing to do. At this stage of the economic recovery, it is better that our support is targeted on and focused on supporting viable jobs in our economy, and that means a new approach. Extending the furlough and allowing people to be at home full-time is not the right approach at this phase of the economic crisis, and our new scheme will ensure that we do provide support to those who need it the most and protect as many viable jobs as possible in many, indeed, of the industries she mentioned. She asked about conditions. I agree with her. There should be conditions on larger companies accessing support from the government for wage protection. Indeed, there will be conditions both on capital redistributions, as I said, but also on the ability to provide redundancy notices to employees whilst they are on the scheme, and indeed in the first place limiting the eligibility for large companies to those that are most in need. And with regard to dialogue with the Scottish Government, I'm pleased to say that the Chief Secretary of Treasury speaks regularly with his counterparts, as indeed I believe he is doing very shortly. With regard to budgets, there is a well-worked process for how devolved nation budgets are set. There is absolutely no requirement for UK budget to be done beforehand, and indeed that was not the case earlier this spring. We will have OBR forecasts that come later this autumn, and on the basis of those forecasts, the normal work will be done with our counterparts in devolved authorities to ensure that they can set the budgets that they need.
Les Ross.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Over 900,000 Scottish jobs have been protected as a result of the UK Government's furlough scheme during the worst of this crisis. That's ensured over the last 6 months that Scottish families have continued, hundreds of thousands of these families have continued to maintain a regular income. And I welcome the further support announced by the UK Government today. Could the Chancellor of the Exchequer outline how these UK Government measures will benefit communities, businesses, individuals and families across Scotland as we enter this next difficult phase in our fight against coronavirus?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question, and I'm also grateful to him for the conversations that he has had with both me and the Prime Minister in the importance of supporting every part of our United Kingdom as we go through this economic crisis and drive our recovery forward. That is something that this government will always take very seriously, and he has been very helpful and played a valuable role in ensuring that the measures we have put in place today will benefit companies and workers in every single part of our United Kingdom.
Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Large parts of the North, including my constituency of Warrington North, are under extra restrictions but are not being given additional support from the Treasury, whether for our local authorities or our businesses. If this government's levelling up agenda is to mean anything, this must be urgently addressed. Today's statement is a significant change of direction from whatever it takes. So what extra measures will the Chancellor provide to constituencies like mine to ensure that we are not levelled down as a result of this pandemic?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Speaker, there is support in place through the NHS for local authorities for any response in areas of tightened restrictions, whether that's for community information, enhanced testing, and lately we outlined a self-isolation incentive payments of up to £500, and also a business grant support scheme for businesses that have been ordered to close. This government remains committed to levelling up in every part of our country, as outlined in our ambitious plans to invest in infrastructure in every part of our country.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Eat Out to Help Out scheme was a massive success in Ashfield, with 53,000 meals served. The scheme saved thousands of jobs and kept hundreds of businesses open. However, my wife is not happy with the Chancellor, because I put a stone on him weight during August, which meant I needed bigger clothes. But John O. Edwards, who owns the world-famous Junction Bar and restaurant, is very happy with the Chancellor. John O. tells me that without the Chancellor's support, his bar would have closed and his staff, who are like a family to him, would have lost their jobs. So can I pass my thanks on to the Chancellor from every single pub and hospitality business in Ashfield for extending the 5% VAT cut until next March. John O. Edwards, Dame Margot and Donna at the Junction pub will be very happy with this great news.
The Exchequer.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and I'm glad our initiatives have made such a difference on the ground to people in his constituency, protecting jobs, as I'm sure they have elsewhere. I very much hope that I can come and visit with him, Jono and his team at the Junction pub in the near future, and I wish them every support through the next few months and hope that the measures that we've put in place today will continue to ensure that they can thrive in the future.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've called for targeted support for jobs in the aviation sector a number of times, a sector that is viable if not for the impact of coronavirus. But in my constituency of Luton South, EasyJet, TUI, Luton Airport have already been forced into making redundancies due to the lack of government support. So can the Chancellor explain why the government waited until a week after the deadline passed for consultation on large redundancies caused by the end of the coronavirus job retention scheme to announce its replacement?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, our response will continue to evolve as the circumstances demand. With respect to aviation, I have every sympathy for companies and employees in that sector. Obviously, they've been very hard hit. The measures that we've put in place have made a significant difference to businesses in that sector, and indeed, I think that one of the ones she mentioned, and indeed many others, have accessed some of our much larger loan schemes to provide vital liquidity at a very difficult time. And I know many businesses in the aerospace supply chain will particularly welcome the part-time working job support scheme we have announced today, as it will be particularly well suited for their manufacturing businesses today.
Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Chancellor's statement. His stamp duty holiday, which is due to expire on the 31st of March, has been extremely successful in stimulating a very important part of the UK economy. What plans does he have for further housing initiatives, which will not only generate business activity, but if properly focused, can also alleviate poverty and promote social mobility?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. He's absolutely right. The stamp duty cut is driving activity in the housing market, which is helping to protect jobs in that sector. I would point him to our Green Homes Grant, which the Department for Business are shortly to roll out, which will provide households with a grant of up to £5,000 to subsidise initiatives to improve the insulation and energy efficiency of their homes. There will be larger grants available for those households most in need, as determined by their local authorities, helping them not only to save on carbon emissions, but also up to £300 a year on their energy bills.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We talk about green industrial revolution and the Chancellor talks about job protection, yet just last week Scottish Yards missed out on the contracts for the Sea Green offshore wind project. So in terms of real job creation, will you consider the Scottish Government's plea for an £80 billion UK stimulus? Will it confirm when the National Infrastructure Strategy and Energy White Paper will be published? And crucially, will it instruct officials to look at how the CFD process works and change it so it incentivises the use of UK supply chains?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable member is absolutely right about the importance of offshore wind to our economy. It is something that we have a global strategic competitive advantage in. This government will continue to support that sector in the way that it has. I'm always open to new ideas about how to do that, but we must make sure that we double down on our advantage and drive jobs in every part of our country, not just in Scotland, but also in the North East, where we have considerable advantages over other countries, and not just in providing energy, but now manufacturing more of the content that goes into our turbines.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement? Will he agree with me that as the coronavirus is now threatening our recovery, it is right that we focus our support on the problems that businesses in Redcar and Cleveland and elsewhere are facing right now? Support for viable businesses and viable jobs through a time of depressed demand due to the restriction that the virus threatens is exactly what the new job support scheme delivers.
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and he knows all too well what the businesses in his constituency need, and what they need is support to get through this period of depressed demand. They need our support to protect those viable jobs, to help them get through to the other side, and that's exactly what the job support scheme will deliver.
Stephen Farring.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is right that the economic support schemes do evolve, and this will be a lifeline to many people in Northern Ireland. The Prime Minister has talked about embracing everyone and also the need for creativity and innovation. But surely there are two gaps in today's announcements. The first is, of course, the excluded, and the second is for those companies where even paying a third of the wages is not a viable option at this time, but they do have sustainable futures, such as in the arts and creative industries and aerospace.
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in terms of the arts and creative industries, we provided over £1.5 billion of funding to support vital institutions in every part of the United Kingdom through that scheme. But it is important now that support is focused on those companies that can provide viable jobs with a genuinely secure future for their employees. And as we have set the scheme, it is very similar to those around the world and gets that balance right, being generous with our support, but also making sure that support is targeted where it can do the most good.
Joy Morrissey.
Thank Madam Deputy Speaker, may I thank my right honourable friend for listening to members of this House for our concerns about small businesses, the self-employed. May I thank him for taking the time to engage with us and to hear our concerns. In Beaconsfield, in my constituency, we have 4,000 people who have already benefited from the government's self-employed income support scheme, protecting their livelihoods. And may I therefore welcome today's announcement that we are going to continue that support for the self-employed through a further extension in the grant and continuing our unprecedented support for both employed and self-employed. And may I invite my right honourable friend to Marlow to see all the good work that he has done through his schemes. Thank you.
The Exchequer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very happy to take up my honourable friend on her invitation, and she is right to highlight the very comprehensive support that we have put in place for the self-employed. And again, compared to almost any other country anywhere in the world, it is more comprehensive, generous, and has lasted for far longer than one can find elsewhere.
We now go to Christine Jardine. We seem to have some trouble hearing from Christine Jardine. I will move on and try to come back to her if we can sort out what is wrong with the sound. Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Throughout this crisis, this is a Chancellor who has moved with speed and determination to protect jobs and family incomes. I welcome his comments today about targeting job support on viable companies with viable jobs. Implicit in that, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a recognition that, sadly, unemployment will continue to increase. So can I ask my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, to say a bit more about the importance of the social security safety net at this time, and to reaffirm the importance of the increase that we made right at the start of this crisis to universal credit, and perhaps tell us that there is no intention on the part of the government to withdraw that?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome my honourable friend's comments, and he knows better than most what a difference our welfare system and indeed DWP and their phenomenal staff can make on the ground. And I know he will join me in welcoming the increase temporarily that we have put on universal credit for this year, providing almost £1,000 extra to those who are in receipt of it, but also our further increases in generosity to local housing allowance and the provision of hardship funds to those struggling to pay their council tax bills distributed through local authorities. In sum, that represents a significant amount of support for the most vulnerable in our society, a point that was borne out in the distribution analysis we published in this summer that showed it was the most vulnerable in our society who have benefited the most from our support.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On universal credit, the Chancellor rightly, at the start of the pandemic, suspended the minimum income floor in universal credit to avoid an unnecessary barrier to new self-employment. Given his welcome announcements today, will he extend the duration of that suspension beyond the middle of November, when it's currently due to end?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, obviously decisions for the exact operation of our welfare system are for the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, but I will happily reflect on the point that the honourable gentleman made, and he has right, that has made a significant difference in the early stage of this crisis, but as we go through it, we will make sure that we adjust and tailor our support to match the needs of the moment.
Let's see if we can get back to Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hope you can hear me this time. I would thank the Chancellor for early sight of his statement, which I would give a cautious bilk to the extent that he has listened to calls from Liberal Democrats to extend furlough and create some flexibility based on the German Kurzarbeit model. But, Chancellor, what about the 3 million people who've had no support for 6 months and will still be excluded from financial help? Where are the job creation plans to tackle unemployment and for those who can't work for a third of the time? And where are the incentives for manufacturing and industry to invest in this country and create new jobs, the green revolution, and allow us to compete with our European neighbours who are already moving ahead of us? Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, in terms of ensuring that we are winners in the green industrial revolution, I would point the Honourable Lady to measures that we already announced in the budget to provide significant support for initiatives like carbon capture and storage, for example, the construction of a charging infrastructure fund to build more charging points across the United Kingdom. These types of measures will make an enormous difference, coming as they do on top of our other commitment to double our R&D spending over the next few years, ensuring that businesses across the UK can play a leading role in driving our progress towards meeting our climate targets and also creating new jobs in the process.
Nikki Aiken.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the Chancellor's statement, particularly the extension of the VAT to 5% cut till next March. I know that many of the hospitality businesses in my constituency of the cities of London and Westminster will also welcome this as they grapple with the loss of tourists and office workers. Many are reporting trading is at 20% of normal levels. Would my right honourable friend therefore agree to meet with me and representatives of theatres and the hospitality retail sectors to discuss what further measures we can hope for to support the West End recovery?
Chancellor the Exchequer.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I know she spent a lot of her time focused on this issue, and her businesses in her constituency are facing an especially hard time. I'd be delighted to meet with her and them to see what more we can do to support them.
Chris Bryant.
I used to be a curate, so I can recognise a curate's egg when I see one. This is good, but only in parts. The truth is that lots of people's jobs are only unviable because of the virus and because of government restrictions. I'm not attacking the government for that, but that's the simple truth. And I think we therefore have a moral duty to try and help those people survive with proper livelihoods into the future. That especially applies in my patch to the aviation industry and to the hospitality industry. So I hope that the Chancellor will be able to say something more about future grants, specific grants, not just loans for businesses like that who are sorely affected. He still hasn't answered the question about the 3 million who got nothing earlier this year. Maybe there was something hidden in what he was saying about the self-employed, which means that more people will get support this time, but he must have had constituents as well as I. And finally, I just say to him, I wrote to him on the 23rd of February, 214 days ago, about the massive flooding that we had in South Wales. He's not replied yet. We have a tip that's fallen into the river. Can he come and visit the Rhondda? And see the problems that we have. We really need financial support. The Prime Minister has promised that an answer is coming quickly. We've still not had it. Or he could just send a cheque.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I apologise to the honourable member, and I will certainly go and find his correspondence as soon as I can and get him the reply that he deserves. And I don't think I disagree with him. I think it is right that we focus our support on viable jobs. Those jobs are in part not viable because of the restrictions. The balance that we have to get right is now understanding that this virus will be something that we are dealing with for a while to come. It is not something that is here and then gone, and that changes what our support should do. We have to focus and target it on those where there is genuine prospect of employment. I think the job support scheme gets that balance right. It is generous and flexible, and with regard to hospitality, which is important to him, I know that industry will warmly welcome the extension of the VAT cut into the spring.
Lucy Allen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor has shown himself to be nimble and agile throughout this crisis, and I congratulate him on this statement and his recognition that we must adapt and evolve and can no longer put our lives on hold. I particularly welcome the measures to support hospitality and the 5% VAT rate extension. Telford has a fantastic international centre for businesses and conferences and brings in 300,000 people every year. Their turnover now is zero. Will my right honourable friend please continue to do all he can to support the events industry that is so important to my town?
Chancellor the Exchequer.
I thank my honourable friend for her comments, and she's right. The government must respond with agility as the virus and our economy evolves over the coming weeks and months, and we will continue to do that. And I very much sympathise with her and those in the events industry for the difficulties that they are experiencing, and I know that there are conversations ongoing with the Business Secretary about what best can be done to ensure at some point in the future we can return to what we all want, which is a thriving industry that her constituency wants to see back.
Ben Lake.
Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor mentioned the fact that the existing self-employed support grant will be extended on similar terms and conditions as the new job support scheme. But could he tell the self-employed in rural areas such as Ceredigion, where they represent almost 30% of the workforce, whether he has changed those terms and conditions in such a way as to ensure that those who have been so far excluded from support will now get the help that they deserve?
Exchequer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The eligibility and terms and conditions will remain as they are, with refinements to make sure that businesses over the winter are still trading and that they have suffered and are suffering an impact on their revenues through coronavirus. The reasons for those eligibility criteria are well documented, have been discussed in this House many times, and so I won't recap exactly why they're there. But it is worth bearing in mind that the extension of this support means that we have provided more support to 2.5 million self-employed people, which is considerably more than any other country and for a longer duration of time.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the significant and wide-ranging package that my right honourable friend has introduced. Can I focus upon one element of it, which was cash flow, always a critical issue for businesses? Bounce-back loans have been used by over 1 million companies across the UK, including 1,794 in Harrogate and Knaresborough, worth over £51 million. I therefore welcome the new pay-as-you-go scheme, basically meaning businesses will now enjoy greater flexibility for repaying their loans over a longer period. So would my right honourable friend agree with me that this will be of great value to businesses, that by extending these terms to 10 years means that we'll halve the average monthly repayments?
I think my honourable friend knows the importance of this well from his own business career, the importance of cash flow, and he's absolutely right. To the almost 2,000 businesses in his constituency he mentioned, on average they probably took a bounce-back loan of about £30,000, and this extension to 10 years will reduce the average monthly repayment from something over £500 to just around £300, which will provide thousands of pounds of cash flow relief to his 1,800 businesses, but also 1 million others around the United Kingdom.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As we've heard, during the first stage of the pandemic, around 3 million people across the country have been excluded from support. Yesterday, I was contacted by a wedding photographer in my constituency who was struggling to pay his mortgage and feed his family, and the prospect of many more months of uncertainty is terrifying for him and for many others in similar industries, in event planning and sectors that are unable to operate in anything like normality at the moment. So what assurances can the Chancellor offer that the measures he's announced today will not continue to exclude people like my constituent and many, many more across the country?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the honourable gentleman mentioned mortgages. I mean, I'm sure his constituent, like many others, will have benefited from the mortgage holidays that we put in place, and my honourable friend helped to organise with the banking system, providing 6 months of mortgage holidays for people, and indeed 1 in 6 mortgages across the UK were able to benefit from that very generous scheme.
We now go to Dame Cheryl Gillan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I add my congratulations to the Chancellor on today's really groundbreaking announcements, and particularly for focusing support on viable jobs and ensuring that that support is going where it is most needed. The extended guarantee on CBILS, the pay-as-you-grow and the measures on VAT will be warmly welcomed by individuals and businesses in Cheshire and Amersham. But can he remember the Macorba principle? Annual income £20, annual expenditure £19, 19 shillings and sixpence, result happiness. Annual income £20, annual expenditure £20 and sixpence, result misery. What can he say to my constituents who ask how we're going to pay for this enormous bill, and how can he ensure that we provide value for money for the taxpayer?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I'm grateful for her instruction to me on the fiscal maths that we are grappling with. But she is absolutely right. As we move our way through this crisis, the nature of our response has to change. It is simply not sustainable or affordable to continue to provide the level of support that we did at the beginning of this crisis. That's why our support is now more targeted and focused on where it can make the most difference. That will mean that we can't do absolutely everything that everybody needs or wants, but we will be able to focus it where it can make the most difference, so that as quickly as possible we can get our economy growing again and ensure that the maths that she outlined starts to work in our favour, because it can't be that we borrow at this level forever. We must get our borrowing back under control and eventually get our debt falling again.
We now go to Janet Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Chancellor's statement. We know that almost 700,000 people lost their jobs between March and July. What is the government doing to support these people? Because we've seen the use of food banks in some cases triple. And what will the government do to support those who will lose their jobs in months to come, and to help them during any period of unemployment, and to get them back into work as quickly as possible?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. It is a tragedy that 700,000 people have already lost their jobs, and many more will. And our focus should be and is on finding them with fresh new opportunities to provide the security that they so desperately need for themselves and their family, which is why we have provided incentives for companies to take on new staff through our apprenticeship scheme. We have provided incredibly intensive support through DWP, through a doubling of the number of work coaches and greater wraparound support to help all of those people that she mentioned plot their course and chart a better future for themselves.
Nicola Richards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The new job support scheme rightly focuses on protecting employment and preserving viable jobs during a period of depressed demand, something that businesses and workers in West Bromwich East will be extremely grateful for. Does he agree with me that it's also fair that the scheme targets those businesses who need it the most? And will he set out how this scheme is deliberately targeted in that way? And will he also join me in visiting the incredible Red Lion Desi pub to hear how they benefited from ETAD to help out?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question, and she's absolutely right about the nature of our support at this phase in our recovery. And in a couple of different ways, this support has evolved in the way that she said. It is targeted only for the larger businesses that really need it, who are seeing declines in their revenue, and it is targeted specifically at protecting and supporting viable jobs. Those jobs where there is work to do, but their company is facing a period of repressed demand. This is a scheme that will make an enormous difference to those people, but in a targeted and effective way.
We now go to Neil Gray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. From talking about nobody left behind in July to accepting so-called unviable jobs will be lost today, the Chancellor has failed to live up to his own rhetoric. The viability of these jobs is in large part dependent on entirely necessary government restrictions. And it's disappointing that he continues to abandon the 3 million excluded from support. But given he is now accepting further widespread job losses, why hasn't he made the temporary £20 per week universal credit uplift permanent and expanded it to legacy benefits?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the temporary increase in universal credit lasts all the way through to the end of March next year already, and for those who are most vulnerable, as I previously said, we've provided significant enhanced support through the welfare system. For example, almost £1 billion of extra investment in local housing allowance to help with private rent payments, a hardship fund to help people who are struggling to pay their council tax bills, and, as our analysis showed in the summer, the interventions that this Conservative government have made over the past several months have made the most difference to those on the lowest incomes.
Final question, Sajid Javid.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I know what it's like having to postpone a much anticipated budget, but I'm pleased to see that it hasn't prevented my right honourable friend from doing whatever it takes to protect this economy. And I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think right since the onset of this crisis, he has shown the decisiveness, the resilience and the creativity that this country needs right now, and I commend him for it. I know also that he values infrastructure investment. He knows it's going to form a very important part of our recovery. And so can I urge him to publish the National Infrastructure Strategy, which has been delayed time and time again, as soon as he possibly can, so that we can get on with levelling up across our great country.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend and very good friend for his warm comments, and whatever I have been able to do over the past several months is in no small part thanks to the instruction that he's given me in not one but two different department jobs when he was my boss. He is absolutely right about the importance of infrastructure investment, and indeed he was one of the first people to talk very passionately about the need to significantly increase the amount of money that the government invests in the UK's infrastructure, and it was him as Chancellor who put in place the infrastructure revolution, which I can commit to him I will absolutely deliver on, and he is right, we must publish the National Infrastructure Strategy, and we will do so this autumn.
Thank you. In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safer arrival of those participating in the next, I am suspending the House for 3 minutes.